So today we're going to talk about the landscape photography gear essentials, the basic pieces of equipment you need to get started with landscape photography. So it can be overwhelming as you watch these YouTube videos and you see different pieces and parts of gear. Even I've reviewed different pieces of gear in this channel, multiple tripods and filters and lenses and things like that. And if you're new to landscape photography, it can all start to feel very overwhelming. Like all this gear, you only have a camera, what else do you need? What do you really need to get out there and start practicing your landscape photography and capturing those images that you want to capture? So I decided I'd do this video and break it down to what I consider the 3 basic essentials of camera gear you need to get started with landscape photography. And really, I almost only kept it to 2, but I'm throwing in the 3rd one because I think it helps set the foundation as you move forward, and it's a key piece of equipment if you're going to continue your pursuit of landscape photography. So with that, let's dive into the first one. So first up is you're going to need a camera, something to capture those images with. And it's easy to get overwhelmed if you're new to photography about what you should get. There's micro four thirds, there's crop sensors, there's full frames, there's mirrorless, there's DSLR. And you know, obviously you want to get the nicest camera you can afford, but budget, you know, is a consideration as well. Not everyone has a ton of money, or maybe you're just dipping your toe in a landscape photography and you're not sure if you're going to continue with this, so you don't want to make a huge investment. So with that said, there's a couple of components that go into choosing a camera, and some are technical and some are just what feels good in the hand and what's easy to carry if you're hiking far distance to get these pictures. So things to consider are things like resolution of the camera. A lot of times these days we're trying to aim into the 24 megapixel range, but I will say I shoot with a 16 megapixel micro four thirds camera right here. You saw it in my one lens photography challenge video I shot with this. I got some amazing images with it, and it's not a super expensive camera, and it's a 16 megapixel camera, and I have no problems using it. I mean, just think about it. Several years ago we were shooting on 10 megapixel, 12 megapixel cameras, and we were doing just fine. So while resolution is important, don't get too lost into that. I aim for the 24-ish megapixel if possible, but you know, if you're a little shy because of budget, there's nothing wrong with that. The other piece is dynamic range, how much difference in light the camera can see. The human eye can see close to like 30 stops of light, so we can see from dark to bright and capture all those tonal differences pretty easily with the human eye. No camera has reached that state yet, but they have improved. They used to be around 8 to 10 stops of dynamic range, and now they're up to like 14-ish, maybe even 16 on some really high-end cameras, stops of tonal range. That's important too. But again, if you're on a budget, you're not going to get that massive dynamic range out of the more expensive cameras, but don't let that stop you. There's photography techniques that you can use to help compensate for that. So don't get too lost in that. Essentially, you just need to get out there with a camera and start taking pictures. If you're just getting started with an iPhone, that's fine. That's a place to start. You can learn your compositions, you can learn to see a scene, you can learn to see light with an iPhone starting there. But with that said, different choices. You have a micro four thirds. This is a Panasonic GX85. It's small, lightweight. It's sort of my everyday carry camera. Like I said, it's 16 megapixels. I like it because it's small, light, and it wasn't super expensive. Moving up, you've got crop sensor cameras. This is a Nikon D7200. It's a crop sensor, so it's not full frame, not quite as good in low light, but it's still a great camera, and on the used market you can find these pretty inexpensively, and these can be an okay way to get started. And then there's full frame DSLR, which are a little better in low light, can get that increased dynamic range and things like that. Of course, you start to spend a little more money for those full frame. And of course, we're in the age of mirrorless, and that's where the world in photography is heading. And then you've got something like this, like it's a Nikon Z6 II up here, which is a full frame mirrorless camera, 24 megapixel, a good all-around camera. And the other advantage the mirrorless brings is portability, travel. This used to be a smaller than a full frame camera, and that was one of the things that made it more attractive. But if you compare this to my mirrorless, I get a full frame package in a mirrorless piece here that's still smaller than even this crop sensor. So when it comes to picking a camera, you do want to get the best you can afford, but if your budget is smaller, there is nothing wrong with a micro four thirds camera or an entry-level mirrorless camera. If you want to go look for an entry-level mirrorless camera, there's nothing wrong with that. If you think you're a little more serious about it, I would encourage you to head towards the full frame side of the world, but it's not a necessity. So when choosing a camera, it's helpful to go pick them up if you have a local camera store to go see what they feel like in your hand. The ergonomics of a camera is actually a very important thing to me. The technical specs these days, they're all in the ballpark. You know, Fuji's, Nikon's, Sony's, Canon's. Specs-wise, we can all find them in the same ballpark of specs. I like to know how they feel in my hand. But the important thing at the end of the day is that you have a camera. Don't get lost in, do you have the nicest camera? You don't need the nicest camera to take good landscape photography pictures, but you do need a camera. So let's move on to lenses and what you need to get started with landscape photography there. Obviously, I've got a bag full of lenses from different focal lengths, ultra wide to a nice mid-range to a telephoto. When you're new to this, you're not going to necessarily have the funds to go out and get started with 3 great lenses and get rolling. You only really need 1 lens to get started with, and that's what you learn and you practice on. You learn the pros and cons, and then you'll start to make your own decisions about where you want to go. Do you want wider? Do you want telephoto, or what? A lot of camera packages these days come with a kit lens, and if you have not bought a camera before and you're buying a new camera, look for one that's a kit that'll come bundled with a lens. A lot of times the kit lens that comes with a camera is decent for landscape photography. For example, this camera came with, I believe, an 18 to 55 lens, which was great to get started. It worked just fine. It gave me that little bit of wide to a little bit of depth, that nice little mid-range, and let me practice all I could possibly want to for landscape photography. Are there nicer lenses available? Yes, there are. But to get out there and started, you can get started with a kit lens. Some of the mirrorless ones, this one up here, I believe comes in a package with either a 24-70 f4, which is a very solid lens, or you can even get the 24 to 200 that you've heard me talk about on many of my videos, bundled as a kit as well. Which one should you get? I would tend towards a mid-range. The 18-55 on a crop sensor is great. 24 to 70 on a full frame's a nice little range. This is a 24-70 f4 lens. Great mid-range camera. This is a Nikon lens, has nice optics, and it's a great little lens. This has the 24 to 200 on it right now. Another great lens. Like if this was packaged, if I was new to photography, buying a mirrorless Nikon, I would aim for the package with the Nikon Z6 or Z7 or Z50 with a 24 to 200 lens bundled with it. That gives you pretty much everything except for the ultra wide. If you're only going to have one lens, I aim for the mid-range. As you practice your photography, you'll find out, do you tend more towards wanting a wider lens, in which case you can go pick up something like a 14 to 30 or something in its equivalent for the manufacturer, or do you want additional telephoto out of it as well? So you do need a lens. Do be wary. Lens quality can impact the quality of the image. Lenses can last a long time. So if you have the money to spare, invest in a good lens. But again, this is one of those things, don't let I don't have $1,500 to get a lens stop you from getting something and going out and practicing. Just get out there and start practicing. The practice is what's going to help inform you as to what lens you really want. But going with one lens, I aim towards that mid-range lens. Okay, so moving on from lenses, we go to the third item for landscape photography that I consider a basic piece of equipment. And I almost left this one off the list and didn't include it because I was trying to trim this down to what I consider the pure basics. There's several nice to haves we'll hit in another video, but I was trying to make this video about the basics to get you started. And that was the tripod. And I almost left it off because really, truly, you can get started without a tripod. If it's not super low light, you can make some camera setting changes and you can hand hold your camera or find something to balance it on to help get those steady pictures. But I think if you're going to consider landscape photography as a genre, you're really going to pursue a tripod can help you. First, from a non-technical piece, is it makes you think about your composition because you're going to put your camera on something and you can't just move and like this. So I think it makes you be more deliberate about your composition, use a tripod, which I think will lead to more successful landscape photography images because so much of landscape photography is the composition. So that's why I'm including the tripod. When you're first starting, if you just have camera, lens, and your memory card, you're good. Go out, start photographing, and start saving up for your tripod. I do think it makes enough of an improvement, is enough of a basic essential that you should consider making sure that's in there, and that's why we're including it in this video. What do you want to look for in a tripod? The big things are stability, portability. So if you're going to drive your car and park at outlooks, weight, size doesn't matter as much. If you're going to put it on a pack and hike around with it, then you want to consider size. I ended up with this FLM tripod because I was going to carry it around a lot. So I wanted something that was lightweight, reasonably sized, that I could fly with and everything like that. At the end of the day, you're just getting started. You just need one tripod. I aim for that mid-road where you can travel with it, it's easy to take on a pack, and still robust. There's carbon fiber tripods, there's aluminum tripods. This is carbon fiber for the lightweightness of it. Aluminum's a little heavier, but it can also add a little more weight to make the platform a little more stable. So there's pros and cons. But really, when it comes down to it, size of tripod, portability. Don't go too cheap on tripods. This is one of those things where you're probably not going to listen to me. You're going to see the $100 tripod and you're going to go buy it and you're going to think you got a great deal. and in 6 months, 9 months, you're going to realize I probably should spend a little more. I've definitely repeated that cycle, bought cheap tripods, upgraded to nicer tripods, and this is just one of those things where take it from an experienced photographer, spend a little money on a tripod, it will outlast your cameras, so investing in a good one is worth doing. So of course with a tripod, you also need a tripod head to go on top of the legs to attach your camera to. It attaches up here, and there's different types of tripod heads. There's geared heads, there's pan and tilt heads, and there's ball heads. I tend towards the ball head for landscape photography. Geared heads have their place in like architectural photography and things like that. Pan and tilt have their place in a lot more video type of the world. I find a ball head a nice, versatile head to use. The heads will sometimes come with the tripod, or sometimes you buy your tripod legs and then get a head separately. Most of the time, if you're buying a higher end tripod, which I would encourage you to get a decent tripod, it'll be a buy the tripod legs and buy the head separately. They don't always have to be the same brand. This is an FLM tripod base. This is a Sarui. Really what you're looking for in a ball head, assuming you go that direction, is what's the load capacity of the head. If you're shooting a big DSLR with a 70-200, you're gonna want something with a little higher load capacity to help hold the camera up there. If you're shooting lightweight mirrorless and not using big heavy telephoto lenses, you can get by with a slightly less load capacity. Just remember, load capacity is not so much just the weight that sits on it. If you got a big lens hanging on it, physics is going to put additional pressure on it, pushing forward. So, get something that's decent. I use a K30X Sarui up here. I think it's a 44-ish pound load capacity. I'm shooting primarily mirrorless, so it works just fine. They have a model that's slightly up. Like I said, really it's a balance of that. So again, hopefully this gives you a spot to sort of think about researching your tripod. Essentially you want a reasonable set of tripod legs, tripod head to go with it. So those are the three things I consider basic essentials for landscape photography and getting started. You got your camera, you got your lenses, and you've got your tripod with tripod head. Those three things, you can get started and get out there and start taking some amazing images. Budgets can vary. You can go with budget cameras to midline kit lenses to high-end lenses to varying degrees of tripods, but that'll get you out there in the field practicing taking photos and getting your own experiences. And your own experiences is what's really going to start to shape what path you really want to go, both towards equipment-wise and what you want to photograph. You can watch a bazillion YouTube videos on the tech specs of things, but until you get out there and play and practice, you don't know what's important to you. And what is important to me may not be important to you and could influence your certain gear choices. So that's it. That's what you need to get out there and get started. Don't get overwhelmed with all the YouTube videos and all the articles and all the internet with all these fancy, crazy things and multiple lenses and bags full of gear. At the end of the day, you need a camera, you need a lens, and a tripod's nice to have. Sort of essential in my opinion, which is why I include it, to get out there and start photographing. Are there other things out there equipment-wise that can make your landscape photography a little easier? Sure. There's filters, there's L brackets, there's a good camera bag. But like I said, I wanted to keep this just to the basics. We will dive into some of those other nice-to-haves, that sort of short nice-to-have list that I think are almost essentials, but I don't want them to be seen as holding you back, that you have to have before you can get out in the field. So we'll cover those in another video. So if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. And if you want to see future landscape photography content from me, please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any tips, tricks, gear reviews, or behind-the-scenes looks regarding landscape photography in the future. And thank you for watching.